Hi, Nikki here with the Canton Museum of Art presenting Museum to Go Takeout. As you can see, I have a ton of stuff on my table today. I wonder what we're going to make. If you were with me last week, then you know that we made a symmetrical image transfer of a flower. Today, we're going to be talking about history, but we're going to still explore flowers for our project because after all, it is the springtime. Today, we're going to learn about all kinds of people in history and happenings in history, but we're going to really focus on the Great Migration, the Harlem Renaissance, and the work of an artist named Romare Bearden. I'm really excited to do this project with you because if you remember from the first video we did, we worked with a bunch of different materials to make a mosaic of a place in our community that was important to us. Today, we're going to be working with a bunch of materials to make a collage, which is similar to a mosaic, but we're going to be working with all kinds of springtime motifs. All right, let's hop in. The Great Migration was a time between 1900 and 1940 to 1950, when a large portion of the African American population in the southern United States emigrated north seeking refuge from racial tension and violence in the South. People moving to the north were also seeking new job opportunities in the automotive industry, construction industry, in steel mills, and working for the railroad in northern cities. In 1900, 7.92 million African Americans lived in southern states. By 1940, over 10 million African Americans lived in the northern and midwestern cities, including Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, and New York City. The Great Migration was the largest and fastest movement by a group of people moving from one part of a country to another in history. The Great Migration also included more emigration from the southern United States to the northern United States than immigration from Italy, Ireland, and Germany combined from 1900 to 1950. Moving north not only afforded families with better job prospects, economic stability, a better standard of living, and a refuge from the violence and turmoil in the South, the migration supported children with better opportunities for education, provided students with diverse and integrated learning environments, and established important political, social, literary, and artistic movements in these northern cities. Black-owned and operated newspapers, magazines, cultural centers, churches, and businesses became part of the economic backbone of places like New York City and Detroit throughout the 1920s and 30s. A lot of these places survived through the Great Depression and became cultural meccas for artists, authors, and also musicians during this time. A great example of the cultural influence of the Great Migration is the Harlem Renaissance, which can be described as a literary and artistic movement highlighting Black culture in Harlem, New York City. The Harlem Renaissance had many important figures whose literary, artistic, and musical influence are still prevalent in today's America. Harlem fashion in the late 19-teens and early 20s as a result of the Great Migration helped spur the flapper movement of the late 1920s. Some important figures of the Harlem Renaissance include authors Langston Hughes, seen left, Zora Neale Hurston, seen in the middle, and Alain Locke, seen on the right. Alain Locke also later went on to become an important figure in the gay rights movement. Blues music, brought to Harlem from the South, and jazz music were huge influences on the world of music during the Harlem Renaissance. Duke Ellington, pictured left, Bessie Smith in the middle, and Fats Waller, pictured on the right, all were very prominent figures of the Harlem Renaissance and moving jazz music into the forefront of American minds. The music of the Harlem Renaissance eventually gave way to free jazz and bebop in the 1950s and 60s. Jazz music not only made a huge impact on the music world, it also made an impact on art and writing. Artists such as Romare Bearden, Jacob Lawrence, and Aaron Douglas are among some of the most influential figures in African American art. All of these artists were part of the Harlem Renaissance. Jazz's influence can be seen in the work of all of these artists. These artists are also well known for documenting their experience with the Great Migration and also documenting their families' experiences with slavery. These artists are extremely important to the canon of art history because they changed the way in which Americans think about the issues plaguing the Black community. The work of these artists helped to open doors for younger artists coming up in the 1980s, 1990s, and their influence can even be seen in art today. We're going to talk a little bit more about the artist Romare Bearden, his life, and his art. I like that in many of the pictures that I found of Romare Bearden, he's featured with his cat. Obviously, you can see why that might be important to me. Romare Bearden was a painter, printmaker, and collage artist born in North Carolina in 1911. His family migrated north as part of the Great Migration when he was just a toddler. His family was in the first wave of people coming north in the Great Migration, and they settled in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, but eventually moved to Harlem, New York. Bearden's family home in Harlem became a meeting place for Black authors and social reformists through the 1930s. Romare Bearden's parents were a huge influence on him, and his parents' friends were also a huge influence on him. While Romare Bearden was at college at Lincoln University and later Boston University, he would travel to Harlem often on the weekends to see his family. Bearden's artwork was greatly influenced by the stories of his family's past, by his family, by the friends of his family that he encountered on his trips home, and also by his own experiences growing up as a young Black man after the Great Migration. In the late 1930s, Romare Bearden began making political cartoons for a Black-run newspaper in Baltimore called the Baltimore Afro-American. Bearden worked as a social worker and political cartoonist, making his art on the side until 1942 when he began fighting in World War II. When he arrived back in the States in 1945, Bearden settled in Harlem for good and began to produce work centered around life in the American South, which became a common motif of his work over time. Some of Bearden's earliest work from the late 1930s can be seen on the left with the semi-realistic painting of a woman carrying a bunch of collard greens. His work in the 50s became more abstract, and he began working with collage. You can see the influence of jazz coming into his work with this image on the top. Bearden's early collage work of the 1950s, as seen in the last slide, gave way to his work of the 1960s and 70s, of which he is most well known for. The influence of jazz improvisation and the bebop jazz movement is very apparent in this work. Improvisation is the technique where jazz artists make music without much preparation in response to other music which other musicians have made. A lot of the time, a musician will have something prepared and they will come in, and when they're playing with other musicians, the other musicians will respond to the art which they have prepared by coming up with corresponding parts on the fly. When a visual artist improvises, often they come up with a motif and then they begin to build on top of it by responding to things they've already done. For example, if you look at the picture on the left, it's possible that maybe Romare Bearden made his background and then began building on top of it, responding to things that he had already done. Sometimes when I make art, I like to improvise by looking at a color that I've already put down and deciding what color might go well next to that color. I also sometimes like to add in little tiny bits of things that I didn't originally expect I would put in my artwork. Do you have any experiences improvising? Let me know in the comments below. Let's check out one last work by Romare Bearden, which is in the permanent collection at the Canton Museum of Art. This image is a print by Romare Bearden, and while it's not dated, a lot of prints of this image have been made and are dated sometime in the 1970s. You can see in this work that Romare Bearden has made the image of a woman in a garden. It looks like she has strawberries in a basket and maybe she's picking some other things. Take a minute to look at this image and point out what you see. You can point it out to yourself or you can point it out in the comments below if you'd like to talk to me about it. Does this image resonate with you? That means, does this image make you feel something special? This image makes me think about some of the things that I've been doing during quarantine. I have some nice flower gardens and I've been cutting flowers for my yard. I've also eaten a couple of strawberries. Have you done anything the last couple weeks that makes you think of this image? It kind of looks like there's a barn behind the woman with her strawberries. And maybe there's a house behind that. Have you seen any birds? Do you have a barn? Have you spent a lot of time in your house? I want you to think about this, and then I want you to remember the art that we made last week. We made art with flowers last week, and we talked about symmetry. This week, we're going to go further into making art with flowers, but we're going to bring techniques from the first video we did where we worked with collage, and we're going to work with improvisation today. Let's get started on an improvisational flower collage. Okay, so like I said, I have a lot of materials on my table. I have some buttons from my grandma that I got from her a long time ago. I have some magazines, this really cool printed box that something came in. I have some glitter paper because I love glitter. I hope you love glitter. I have this rose stamp because we're working with flowers today. Glue. I have this bag of all kinds of colored pencils and markers and all kinds of things, crayons, some random letter stickers. Maybe you have stickers that you like. And I also have some paint over here. I don't think I'll probably use much paint, but I have it because I can. And I'm going to be doing my project on a piece of foam board. Now, this would work with a piece of cardboard or maybe a heavy piece of poster board if you don't have anything that you can cut or press into. I just happen to have a piece of foam board laying around, so I decided, why not use it? To jump in, I'm going to start thinking about some things that maybe Romare Bearden did in his work. So remember when we were looking at his picture in the garden, and we were thinking about what it looked like, what we saw in the picture. I saw a bunch of kind of blocky colors, and that's something that Romare Bearden is really well known for. So I think that I might just start with ripping some paper, and maybe I will lay this down, and I think I'll glue it down. Glue stick, which is my personal favorite kind of glue. You can use any glue you want. You don't even have to glue down paper. You could paint a big swatch of color. You could color one with crayons, colored pencils, pastels, sidewalk chalk. It's all up to you. I'm just deciding to use a little purple. Now, I'm going to make a more abstract picture with flowers on top. And remember that abstract art is art that you don't necessarily know much about until you read about it. It's big blocks of color and shapes, and it's more focused on the way that things look. If you wanted to do something where maybe it was a little bit more representational, meaning that it looked like a space or something, you could always start with like a sky and maybe some grass and make some flowers coming out of it. It's really up to you. What I like about these at-home projects is they're all looking really different, and we can decide what kind of thing we like to do. And when we're working with a bunch of different materials, sometimes it helps us to discover our own personal style in artwork. My personal style happens to be a little bit blocky and abstract, with a lot of shapes and colors, and also I might add in something real looking from time to time. Okay, so I have this little picture here now, and I can really put anything on it that I want. This is kind of a blank canvas. I found some more random paper scraps in my bag, so I think that I'm going to glue down a couple more of those and start with a little collaged background. What color is this? Ooh, we've got a tiny piece of gold sparkle. I think I'll use that. Now, this is a fun trick that I like to do when I have a stamp, but I don't have an ink pad. So I'm gonna take this big marker and I'm just going to color over the stamp. And rubber tends to make wet things stay wet for a while. But now I'm gonna lay it down. You can make your own stamps too. I like going on YouTube or some other sites and seeing some cool art projects that people do where they do things like make their own stamps. I like using a stamp for this project because in the garden is a print, and making stamps out of linoleum or wood is a type of printmaking. I'm gonna pull that up. So now I have this cool flower, I have a couple of blocks of color, and I'm gonna work even more with making some of my own flowers by drawing and then collaging into the flowers. I might even collage some stuff into this one, but I'm not sure. Now, like I said, everyone's project is going to look a lot different. So maybe you're just taking colors that you've seen from a flower that you really love. Maybe you love fuchsia tulips and you have some that grow in your yard and you think that it would be fun to just use those colors. That's awesome. Maybe you want to use the shape of flowers and draw your own actual flowers. There's no right or wrong way to do these projects, like I've said. We're kind of exploring art materials in this. So I'm gonna start by maybe even making my own kind of rose up here with a black outline. I'm just using crayon because it's what I have around the house. Now remember when I was talking about improvising and how artists improvise sometimes by going off of some things they've already done. So I already stamped a rose. Now I want to try to draw my own rose. I'm improvising. I'm responding to the places in which I've glued things, and I'm drawing over them now, and I'm deciding what I think will look cool in my own collage. Also, improvising can be done by using materials that you just have at hand, not going to buy new materials. So in a lot of ways, improvising is just kind of working with what you're given and making something out of it. Like I was talking about when I was talking about music and musicians going off of some art that other musicians have made, they'll just kind of start by hearing something and then they'll add their own spin on it. Of course, they know what notes to play and they know the rhythm of the song and things like that that make it cohesive and tie the improvisational part into the planned part of music. But we know things like maybe some elements of art that we've learned in some of these other videos. We know about color because we've talked about different types of color schemes that you can use. And all of these things are ways that make us able to make our own art and also improvise. I'm gonna do some more things, but I'm gonna skip ahead a little bit so you can see that I've done a little more work since last I saw you. I'm using some silver Sharpie. Maybe I can kind of turn this and you can see that it's metallic. And I'm just kind of responding to this by creating this rose motif everywhere. Now, when I think about Romare Bearden, I think about how he was a collage artist and a painter and how he drew and how he also used printmaking. I'm using a lot of those techniques in what I'm making today. And I think what's really cool is we can learn about artists from the past and what they did, and we can build on that to make our own masterpieces. I'm going to use this and maybe use some leaves that I see in here. What's your favorite fact that you learned during the part where we talked about the Great Migration and the Harlem Renaissance? Let me know by commenting below. You can see how when we use a bunch of different materials to make a mixed media work, we can still tie them together with similarities between different parts of the picture. So for example, we have 3 roses here. We also have different types of leaves, but we do have leaves. You can see that these roses are all a pretty similar size. So I'm working with some of those elements of design that we talked about, like scale, proportion, the proximity of flower to flower, how there are 3 of them, kind of thinking about drawing your eye around the whole picture. So there are a lot of things that even though we're using a ton of different materials, we can use to really tie this together. I like this blue-green. So to tie this blue-green over here to maybe some blue-green over here, I'm going to go back behind and create a little shape. This is what I call an organic shape. And it's called an organic shape because it is not a geometric shape. So it looks like maybe something that came from nature. You might be able to think of a lake or a pond or maybe a flower petal that's this shape. Okay, so you can see that I'm done adding my field of color here, and I have added another field of color here to kind of mix in these pinks, and I've also mixed in the shape of this. I've made a really big rose down here that I'm gonna start collaging into to make different types of petals. And then I've added another rose up here. You can see that this is really starting to build. And we're using these big fields of color like Romare Bearden. We're also using stamps to bring in printmaking, and I've used some drawing in here. Now, like I said, I'm kind of thinking of this as making my own garden of roses, but you can think of it as making just the picture of a flower or whatever you would like. So I'm gonna go in and start collaging this big rose down here. Oh, I volunteer at an assisted living facility every Sunday, and I've really been missing it while I've been here in quarantine, and I just noticed that I must have taken some of these materials for collage there because one of them has the name Donna written on it, which is the name of the daughter of one of the people that I work with there. I volunteer and I just do a little art class, and that's really special. I think sometimes it can be really tough to kind of feel a little isolated from your friends and your family and the things that you like to do in a situation like this. Is there anything that you feel has been helping you feel like you're going back to normal at all? Let me know. Do you maybe see your teachers making videos or something? And is it kind of helpful to see your teachers' faces? Or maybe you've really loved to bake before all of this started and you're baking a lot right now. Let me know what kinds of things are making you feel like you during this in the comments below. Art making, for me, every time that I shoot these videos is something that makes me feel like myself. Now, I'm experimenting, and like I said, I'm improvising with what I have, but foam board is kind of thick and you can press things into it, which I think is really cool. I found these little buttons that kind of remind me of roses. I don't know if you can see that. And I am putting glue on these buttons and pressing them in to see if they stick once the glue dries. I'm kind of imagining that they won't, but it could be an unexpected and exciting surprise that they do. All right, I'm gonna work on this a little bit more, but I think I'm kind of close to done. I don't know what you think. So while I was working, I remembered that I had this really cool fabric that's a bunch of black and white roses. Part of improvisation is kind of remembering the things that you know and then working with them. So I remembered that I have this fabric and I said, oh my gosh, that would go perfectly with this. So I'm just gonna glue some on here. Now, if you want to use fabric in your own collage, remember, we're kind of experimenting. Part of improvisation is experimentation. I know, because I've worked with fabric before, that Elmer's glue tends to hold fabric on things pretty well when I'm working on a collage. But that being said, it gets really messy. It's all over my hands right now. So if you wanted to experiment with maybe using a glue stick or something, you could. You could always cut up an old t-shirt, of course, with permission. Or you could maybe use fabric from a blanket that's falling apart. I know that we all probably have something around our house that's made of fabric that's maybe a little bit past its prime, so you can always kind of find fabric around maybe. Maybe you have a bag that you're taking to Goodwill, or something like that, or something that your little sibling has outgrown, so you can use fabric or not. It's up to you. Now, this piece of fabric that I'm about to glue down is a little bit too big, but I don't want to cut it down until I see the placement. So I'm going to put it on on the corner because I kind of like where this is in relation to this. I'm just gonna spread it around a little bit. And then I'm gonna lift this up just a little bit and cut around it. It might come off a little bit. That's okay. Can just push it down. I'm lucky. I have a lot of fabric because I have a lot of seamstress in my family. My great-grandma was a seamstress. My grandma is a seamstress. My mom's a seamstress. My mom is making a ton of masks right now for people all over Ohio, which is pretty cool. But I get a lot of their leftover fabric scraps because they're like, hey, you do art, maybe you want this fabric. It helps to know people who have a bunch of extra stuff when you're an artist. So right now, this is what my collage looks like. I could keep working on it, but I kind of like where it's at right now. So I think I might just add a little bit extra color down here and maybe some up here, and then I'm gonna call it done. I'll see you when I'm done with this work, and we'll talk about a couple of things just to wrap up. So this is my finished product, and I love it. But you can see that I did end up doing quite a bit more than just adding a little bit of color. I started adding color by adding some blue stripes, and I liked them so much that I repeated them in the other corner. Then my corner that didn't have anything in it started to look kind of bare, so I found some gold sparkle and added some down there to tie in the gold sparkle in the center. Finally, I collaged a little bit more into my big flower and did some coloring in some places, and I just improvised with what I had. I started responding to other things that I was doing in the image, and I think it turned out great. So I hope that you love it. All right, I think that it's time to wrap up for today. Wow, that was my favorite project that we've done yet. I had so much fun experimenting and improvising to make such a wonderful collage. I cannot wait to see the work that you've made. Please make sure that you hashtag your work with hashtag museum2go so that we can check out your work at the Canton Museum of Art, and maybe you might even see it posted on our Facebook page. Stay up to date with our Facebook every Wednesday, and every Thursday look for resources for Museum2go to do other projects based on these projects and take your work even further. Make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel, and don't forget to have fun in life. Thank you so much for spending your wonderful Wednesday with me. I will see you next wonderful Wednesday.